Thanks for joining us on Shannons Club TV, where we look back on significant cars in Australia.
In each episode, we examine our feature car from two perspectives, on the road and in competition. We'll also meet a proud owner and get a market update from the Shannons auctions team.
But first, let's look at the 1980s Japanese hatchback that offered genuine high performance at an affordable price, the Mitsubishi Cordia.
In the April 1983 edition of Wheels, the Mitsubishi Cordia received faint praise. Quote, "This is the latest offering from Mitsubishi, a three-door hatchback which claims to break new ground in the coupe class. But does it?" Unquote. The Cordia's most unusual feature was its faintly absurd 4x2 so-called supershift manual gearbox, as seen in the Colt, with 8 gears if you laboriously swapped between power and economy settings for each gear, which no one did. Even in 1983, we knew the Cordia Turbo was coming, so the 55 kilowatt 1.5 litre GSL provoked scant interest. Interestingly, Mitsubishi Motors Australia Limited, MMAL, was already importing one of Australia's fastest cars, the Starion. When the Cordia GSR Turbo arrived in early 1984, MMAL had two formidable turbocharged hatchbacks, either of which could out-accelerate any Commodore branded Holden rather than HDT. Mark, while many manufacturers had no prospective series production races, Mitsubishi had two.
Yeah, they were spoiled for choice, weren't they?
Absolutely.
Incredible. But you know, the Starion was well established as a competitive force in Group E production car racing when the Cordia arrived on the scene. So as a result, it struggled to get the same level of adoption that the
Same traction, as it were.
Exactly,
yes.
which I'll get to a bit later on. Yeah.
The excitement surrounding these hot coupes gave MMAL favourable publicity prior to launching its radical Magna the following year, by which time the Cordia GSL had a 1.8 litre engine. The cover of the April 1984 edition of Wheels declares "Performance lives" in bold white type above an understeering red Cordia Turbo. Cordia Turbo, 200 kilometres an hour, 15.9 second 400 metres, 13,500, and here now, the cover said. Those numbers were borderline incredible. Just a few months earlier, the Nissan Exa had set a new small car standard, and its figures were nowhere near these. That cover picture is worth 1,000 words. As with so many front drive cars, understeer proved to be the blight of the Cordia Turbo. The optional power steering with 3 rather than 3.6 turns lock to lock was highly desirable. The AA series Cordia was facelifted for the AB and A series that followed, the latter coinciding with the 1986 introduction of unleaded fuel. Behind a more striking grille lurked unfortunate news. Maximum power had dropped from 110 kilowatts to just 90, making this among the hardest hit cars on the market. Mark, not only was the Cordia Turbo the most significant small turbo car of the 1980s, but it was just 2/3 the price of a 5 litre Group 3 Commodore and half as much as the Saab 900 Turbo.
Yeah, it really was a performance bargain, wasn't it? And even, you know, the New South Wales Highway Patrol had a fleet of them at one stage, shows how quick they were. But you know, all of that turbocharged grunt did not guarantee success on the racetrack. Motorsport history is full of curious cars which on paper appeared to have the credentials needed to be race winners, but their potential was never realised. The Cordia GSR Turbo is a good example, as it never emerged from the shadow of its Starion Turbo stablemate. The Cordia seemed to have a promising future in local Group E series production racing, because in its hottest GSR Turbo specification, its numbers looked formidable, particularly when measured against the Starion in 1984. It was more than 200 kilograms lighter, had a more slippery body shape, and a superior power to weight ratio. Its 1.8 litre turbocharged 4 pumped out a sizable 110 kilowatts, which was about double that of most sub-2 litre non-turbo rivals and only a few kilowatts short of Holden's big 5 litre V8. However, it only had rear drum brakes where the Starion had discs, and, most significantly, power went to the front wheels rather than the Starion's more desirable rears. And there was no interest in any serious race development given that the Starion was already a proven race winner. Now, John, like other powerful front-wheel drives of that era, getting grunt to ground was a problem because they didn't have the torque vectoring diffs and the sophisticated electronic traction control systems that we have nowadays, did they?
Well, there were two ways to steer the car, and only one of them was the steering wheel. I mean, I can remember it wasn't, and the Cordia turbo wasn't alone in that.
No.
I can remember that the Telstar TX5 turbo was an absolute shocker.
Now the TX5 turbo, that gave new meaning to the term torque steer, I've got to say.
It did.
But you had the Nissan Exa, the ET, various other cars around that. They were all trying to put big horsepower through front-wheel drive.
And if the Cordia turbo seemed worse than any of the others, it was only because it had so much more power than any of the others.
Yeah, it was an interesting situation for racing though, wasn't it? Because racing always proves if you've got a choice between rear drive or front-wheel drive, guess which way they're going to go?
Rear-wheel drive.
Starion.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely.
Although the Cordia remained out of the Group E spotlight, it did take centre stage in 1985 in a Pro-Am celebrity race supporting the inaugural Formula One Australian Grand Prix in Adelaide. AGP naming rights sponsor Mitsubishi prepared a batch of identical cars for the event at its Adelaide factory. Dealers from around the country were invited to purchase a car each, on which they could prominently display their dealership signage throughout the race weekend. The Pro-Am format paired famous racing drivers with amateur celebrities from business, sport, stage and screen, and the best combined results from separate races for both determined the winners. The Cordia turbos proved to be fast and resilient, with the Sutherland Mitsubishi team of racing great Leo Gagan and England's former Test cricket captain Tony Greig claiming victory. On reflection, the 1985 AGP Pro-Am was undoubtedly the high point for the Cordia GSR Turbo in Australian motorsport. Remember to join the Shannons Club, where you can connect with other enthusiasts around the country.
My name's Rick, I'm from Colac, and this is my 1985 Mitsubishi Cordia Turbo. I've had this one for about 5 years. This car was pretty good body-wise, but it had been modified. I purchased another 3 cars and basically made this car out of the 3 cars and painted it back to its original colour. It's very hard to find these things original. If you do, you're very lucky. There's probably still 1 or 2 of them in someone's shed somewhere. This car's turbo, power steering, optional with air conditioning, but this one didn't have that. When I had my first Cordia, it was the car that I had when I met my partner Renee, and I practically wore that one out. Because I had one previously, I wanted to do a car that was still an old car, H-plated car, but something that was up to today's traffic. My favourite part of the car is just driving it. It's very economical on fuel. Basically was an everyday driver. It's a fun car to drive, and yeah, it's great. It's still old style 80s type technology, but it's good to drive, it's fun to drive. It handles pretty well. It handles as good as a car that was built back in its day. I've been with Shannons for 15 years and I find them very easy to deal with. My future plans is just to finish it off and to restore it back to its original condition, and then yeah, just enjoy it.
Shannons National Auctions Manager Chris Borobon has dropped by to bring us right up to speed on the Mitsubishi Cordia. Welcome, mate.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hey, Chris, when we think about the Cordia, we tend to think Cordia Turbo, but there actually was quite a range of Cordias.
Yeah, that's right. Most of them are naturally aspirated, and then obviously we have the GSR Turbo. Yeah.
Okay, so how does that affect collectability? Is everyone just chasing turbo? I imagine that's what they are.
Look, I think probably in the modern JDM scene, that would be the car to go to.
Okay.
You know, the GSR Turbo, where you probably can, you know, get a bit more out of it, and make it a bit more fun.
I wonder whether there are any Cordia Turbo pursuit cars, New South Wales Police Patrol cars, still surviving in original.
Well, yeah. How would you pick one?
It's hard to say. Look, we barely see them. We have not had one through the auction house. And I think now with the whole JDM scene, you know, you've seen a couple emerge on a private market, but still there's not many Cordias around.
But I'll tell you what's really interesting, and John and I tapped into this. We wrote some feature stories for the Shannons Club website. Wow, we put them up there and we just discovered this cult of absolute Mitsubishi Cordia enthusiasts. Just it's heaps and heaps and heaps of responses, photos of their cars, the modifications they're doing to them, how much they love them. We didn't even know that was there. So there's like a subculture of Mitsubishi Cordia fans. It's pretty strong in this country.
It's interesting, isn't it? And sometimes until you do something like that, it's hard to discover whether that exists or not.
So we've got the three different series. We've got the AA, the AB, the AC. And I guess the AC, because that was involved in the switch to unleaded fuel, lost a lot of power, didn't it?
So it certainly did. It was one of the most affected of all the cars that made that switch. Fortunately, the last of them looked a bit spunkier than the earlier ones, but it was misleading. But that original car that came out in '84, it really redefined the level of performance that you could get in an affordable car, didn't it?
And is it remembered that way? Do you find that there's a nostalgic... People look back at cars from the 70s and 80s and say, oh wow, I really want one of those. Is there a feeling amongst the market now for a GSR Turbo or not?
Look, I think probably in the Turbo, absolutely. It's probably still affordable. That's probably the good thing about it. If you can find one, it's still an affordable level to get into, and you know, it's quite a nice shape of car.
It is.
And I think that's probably why it's got a following. So I think if you can find one that is unrestored, well maintained, well looked after, why not?
I'm guessing that first model Cordia Turbo in that sort of condition will be worth a lot more money in a few years than it is now.
Look, it could well be, and you know, because I think some of them obviously did suffer from some of the rust issues as well over the years. And so if you can find one that is in, you know, structurally good condition and mechanically in good condition, it's probably one to look for.
So regardless of those series, we're looking at a 1.8 naturally aspirated GSL. Or the GSR. So I imagine the pecking order here is pretty simple. It's go for the turbo. But if you could find a really nice one or two owner GSL, that'd just be a nice car to have.
Yes.
It'd be a nice emerging classic, and it'd be something that's you know, great entry level classic.
Anything Japanese is what people want.
Correct. At the moment.
Yeah. Very good. All right, Chris. Thanks for that info.
Not a problem, guys.
And remember, you'll find all the latest auction results on the Shannons Club website. You know, John, looking back on the Mitsubishi Cordia, you know, the demand for the GSR Turbo, I remember it at the time, there were huge waiting lists. People just couldn't get their hands on it. It was a tremendous performance bargain.
Apparently the New South Wales Police wanted them because there was a gap in the production of V8 Commodores in the transition to unleaded fuel. But I was, at the time, ghostwriting a book for Peter Werrett. Now, he was not someone who dispensed praise readily to motor cars.
He was a hard marker.
He drove a Cordia Turbo with the optional power steering, and he gave it the highest tick of recognition.
Yeah, that's really saying something at that time.
I think it was a car that forced everyone to rethink their criteria. I remember doing a comparison between the Cordia Turbo and the 5-litre Commodore. Now, I actually preferred the 5-litre Commodore, but different kind of car. But you were making those sorts of comparisons because no one had ever heard of a 4-cylinder car that went like this. It was a bit like, in a sense, the Cooper S of the mid-1980s. It redefined performance standards for that class of car. That's before we got low-blow turbo. So, you know, turbo cars had lag and nothing at all, and then, that's right, and nothing more so than the Cordia Turbo.
It was a fabulous time, wasn't it?
Indeed.
We hope you've enjoyed reflecting on the memorable Mitsubishi Cordia. Hope you can join us next time for Shannons Club TV. Bye for now.